Today is April 8th, 2014, and this is episode 99. This program is intended for information and educational purposes only. Cryptocurrency is a new field of study. Consult your local futurist, lawyer, and investment advisor before making any decisions whatsoever for yourself. Welcome to Let's Talk Bitcoin, a twice-weekly show about the ideas, people, and projects building the digital economy and the future of money. My name is Adam B. Levine, and today we've got a long one. Back in December, Andreas sat down with Dr. Adam Back, creator of the Hashcash concept that Satoshi built Bitcoin on top of. One of the things that struck me about that interview was the concerns held by Dr. Back over digital scarcity. The idea that other cryptocurrencies dilute the value of Bitcoin by offering the same services, but expanding the supply of tokens able to perform that service. In other sectors, altcoins have been described as the experimental laboratory of the cryptocurrency world. But what if you could have an altcoin ecosystem that offered all the innovation, but was still at its core Bitcoin? I ran into Adam again at the Coin Summit event, along with longtime entrepreneur Austin Hill. Over our long conversation, they share their breakthrough, its implications, and what comes next. Enjoy the show.
So I'm Austin Hill. I've worn a bunch of hats, but first and foremost, I'm an entrepreneur. I did a lot of work in the area of cryptography, privacy, anonymity, and electronic cash with a company called Zero Knowledge Systems that was started in 1997, still exists, but we moved away from a lot of the crypto in the dot-com crash. But there was a period of time where I employed pretty much a huge amount of the core cypherpunks, many of whom had done a lot of the early work on electronic cash systems, including Adam, who worked with me for 4 years. And Adam recently came to me and started talking to me about a new project. And he and a few of the Bitcoin core developers had invented some new extensions to the blockchain. And he wanted my help to build a company around it and to really focus on the idea of a blockchain 2.0 that was forward and backward compatible with the existing blockchain, but could address a lot of the issues of scalability, pace of invention, transaction throughput, multi-asset issuance, and extensions to the smart contract scripting language. So he and I are doing this now, and we're working with a number of the core developers to kind of make a new platform available that we feel will be exciting to the community.
So when you say to make a new platform available, now, I remember the interview that Adam Back did with Andreas Antonopoulos back in December, and there was talk about like a test blockchain that could have features incorporated back into the primary one. Is this the idea that you're talking about?
Yes, that's the basis of it. At the time, I was talking about a concept I came up with early last year called a one-way peg. And since then, Greg Maxwell proposed a two-way peg between Bitcoin and a sidechain, which is even more interesting because with a one-way peg, you're slightly subject to market conditions, and you can only really do it in the context of a planned upgrade as a kind of, Bitcoin current versus Bitcoin beta, and then a switchover date, let's say 18 months in the future, and being able to move coins forwards into the new network and backwards either at market rate or via swapping with other people who want to get in. Now, a two-way peg allows you, with a small change to Bitcoin main, to mathematically peg between the main Bitcoin network and a sidechain network. So then that can be used in a wider set of contexts, including sort of an ongoing alternative sidechains optimized for different purposes. And there can actually be multiple sidechains which are competing on features. So, for example, one could have a larger block size, which may incur some centralization risk potentially, but get higher transactions per second, and the users would be able to unilaterally remove their coins from it and put them back into the main Bitcoin chain. So that would kind of act as a backstop against centralization risk. If you ran into the side effect of centralization risk, you'd have the last resort of removing your coins. So that kind of insulates you from that risk.
So my mind is expanding a little bit here, and I'm going to try and understand what you're telling me. So what you're saying is that we can essentially have multiple chains that are all Bitcoin, but they don't all have their own type of Bitcoin. Basically, or rather, they don't all each have their own money supply. The money supply can move from one chain to another wherever it has the most advantage for the person who's using it at that point, and then it can move back again if it's better used in another chain. Is that right?
The key idea here is to protect the concept of digital scarcity and the 21 million Bitcoin limit. And so by linking chains, what we do is we essentially set Bitcoin up as a transactional currency for all the innovation and for all new assets. So you can potentially issue shares in a sidechain and have a sidechain that's specifically designed around smart contracts for shares, derivatives, other types of issued assets, and they're ultimately backed by Bitcoin. And so you can peg them to Bitcoin.
Right. So Bitcoin becomes, so typically various share-related cryptocurrency ideas or math-based currencies. For example, Ripple has XRPs, Mastercoin has Mastercoins, Ethereum has Ethers. Colorcoin has nothing, right? Because Colorcoin is just watermarking on top of Bitcoin. So one that's artificial scarcity race, and I think it's fairer at this point. I think I talked about this with Andreas a lot on my last interview. Is it's fairer if we just use the existing scarcity race, because it was a surprise. People for the first couple of years didn't have a strong reason to suppose that Bitcoin would succeed and it would bootstrap to a stable value, some volatility, but still a stable, persistent value. Now, if you start a new scarcity race, it's a kind of known quantity, right, that you're hoping strongly that process is going to get repeated. So, and each time you have a new scarcity race, it creates an interoperability silo. Your only way to get into there or to write contracts against it is at market, swapping coins between different networks. So by pegging to Bitcoin, it turns out that it's possible to have sidechains with additional features or faster transactions, more transactions per second, direct support for issued assets, smart contracts, extended smart contracts, all while using Bitcoin itself as the transactional currency. So we feel that's a neutral choice. It's the main choice right now, and it's a neutral choice. It's not starting, a cryptocurrency that's owned by one company, one project, a small group of developers, or early speculators who, if the project succeeds wildly, will become exceedingly rich. This is a kind of more of a neutral stance. So when people talk about building on top of TCP, I think this is actually the way to do it, which is the interoperability using Bitcoins themselves, existing Bitcoins from the Bitcoin network, and being able to move them. So the example would be I have a Bitcoin I bought on the Bitcoin network. I want to use it for small payments to buy a cup of coffee, that kind of thing. From my smartphone, I move it into a sidechain, which has a larger block and so more transactions per second. When I finish with that, I move the change back into the main Bitcoin network, and then I move it into a different sidechain because I want to make some investments and buy some, a Bitcoin-denominated derivative against US dollars or buy some electronic shares or something like that. So you can use Bitcoin as an interoperability level, moving them across the pegs, basically. And it allows open innovation in a neutral sense, without attaching to new scarcity races.
So we've recently seen a fairly popular altcoin, Aurora Coin, come under a 51% time warp attack. And this is because the amount of hashing power in the network dropped off, and it was relatively easy for, a malicious mining group to go in there and kind of mess up their day. So when you're talking about adding additional side chains, do these side chains get all the security of the main Bitcoin chain, or do they each need to be mined, whether through a merged mining process or through something separate? Are there security implications here is the question.
A large part of what we're doing is building the infrastructure so that these side chains can come online and take full advantage of the global hash rate through things like merged mining, but with some additional extensions, because there's some core services that you want. For instance, good PKI for the registry, digitally signing for new asset issuers and sidechains, clear disclosure. If people are able to move Bitcoins in and out of these networks, it should be obvious to a number of the wallets out there what these sidechains are, what are the properties of the sidechain. So when you get an asset from that sidechain, you actually are, the wallets are aware. So there's a lot of really important infrastructure that needs to be done. But a key part of that is making sure that hash rate. We don't see a justification for a lot of these altcoins switching out the proof of work. Aside from Adam's contribution in inventing Hashcash, it ignores close to $250 million worth of ASICs and hardware and data centers that Bitcoin is self-funded as a platform for verification. And so the idea of trying something new and trying to bootstrap a new global hash rate infrastructure, we think is kind of pointless. It makes a lot more sense to use what's out there, very similar to how Namecoin has achieved, 85 or 90% of the Bitcoin hash rate through merge mining. You can do the same thing, but there are supporting services that need to be built for the ecosystem to be trusted.
If this had happened 9 months ago, it would have been a whole new slew of innovative features that I've just heard you list. But now it kind of comes against a backdrop of some competition moving into the space. I wonder, what does this do to protocols that have been building on top of Bitcoin? Does this obsolete their approach? Is this just the way that everybody should be doing everything when it comes to these things?
I think it's a preferable approach because it's an interoperable approach. You can move money around and interoperate between different networks, different sidechains. People like to talk about this TCP analogy, usually quite inaccurately. For example, that they're going to build on top of Bitcoin by sending messages that are actually watermarked Bitcoin transactions. And that doesn't really make sense because, with TCP, you're sending user messages on top of TCP IP, but that's a point-to-point communication link. If you send them over the Bitcoin network, it's an N-squared broadcast, and the things that go on the Bitcoin network should be strictly about the minimum amount of data necessary to ensure the Bitcoin properties, so that the value transfer can be tracked, the smart contracts can be evaluated. The small smart contracts like, multi-sig and so on. And so it should be minimal data, like any data about, this is my email address, or this is a receipt or a description of the product, all that kind of thing doesn't belong on the Bitcoin network. And that's what the payment protocol is for. So the payment protocol is point-to-point between people. And when the payment protocol is done, a transaction-focused message gets broadcast onto the Bitcoin network. So I think some of the people who are talking about building on top of Bitcoin are doing it in a naive way, which is likely to cause disruption for Bitcoin. So, for example, even Colorcoin, which is quite neutral and clean. There's no digital scarcity race attached to it, to scalability issues, because if the share trading involving Colorcoin reached a significant level, it could saturate the Bitcoin network. Right now, Bitcoin is transaction limited around 7 transactions per second. And while the block size could be increasing the block size tends to incur centralization risk because you need high-speed links, data center grade bandwidth to keep up if that gets too large.
When Adam worked with me in the 90s, he had shown me some work he did, which was essentially colored coins with David Shome's eCash server. He had come up with the idea of coloring DigiCash coins and watermarking them. And even last year, he still thought it was the best approach to add extensions. But then we started to look at the ecosystem and saw, with SPV wallets, color coins don't work with SPV wallets. And we do live in a world where mobile phones are a predominant device. So if Bitcoin's going to reach its full potential of reaching or interacting with billions of people, color coins just doesn't work in that scenario because you can't have a full node on a smartphone. On top of which, no one had really contemplated how will this capability of watermarking work. If 2 different people want to register that a coin is blue, and one person thinks that means it's a share and another person means it's a copyright registration, and they both encode it blue, who's the ultimate arbiter? So there were ideas, but no one had really thought out how do color coins work in the Bitcoin ecosystem with SPV-aware clients, with some sort of asset registry, whether you do that on a distributed basis like Namecoin does, or you do it in a centralized PKI digitally signed registry service, there needs to be supporting infrastructure to make something like that work. And no one had really thought about that. I think everyone got enamored with the idea of colored coins and kind of ran off and said, let's just watermark a bunch of things. So, Adam, after looking at it, really abandoned that idea and focused on how can we allow for some of the properties of native marketing, of new asset issuance, extensions to the scripting, build on a neutral platform. I mean, the principles for our new project are principles derived right from Bitcoin. Permissionless innovation, decentralized wherever possible, decentralized and distributed. And, one of the core principles, and we'll be releasing this in more detail once we announce the name of the project and some of the people involved. But the founding principle, when I flew out to work with Adam after he came to recruit me out of retirement, he literally came and knocked me on the head and said, pay attention to Bitcoin. And I had played with it, but, I had spent almost $4 million trying to develop electronic cash. So I still had some battle scars. And it was kind of like, I'm glad someone did it, but I'm not sure if I really want to get back in that game. And Adam came and knocked me on the head and said, Austin, you need to pay attention to Bitcoin. And once I did and saw what he saw, I flew out and we spent a week in a boardroom together just mapping out an ecosystem that I really wanted to get involved and help build. And the number one principle we wrote down on the board was can't be evil. And that's an important distinction from some of the other people who have tried to adhere to principles. And it's very inspired by what we did at Zero Knowledge. We believed in cryptographic systems whereby trust wasn't earned because we were good guys, but trust was based off the protocols, the white paper, and the cryptography where we were not asking for trust.
This is Chris Joseph bringing you news on Next for April 8th, 2014. It was a bright, cold day in April and the clocks were striking 13. The opening sentence of George Orwell's 1984 holds as much significance for Next's creator as the number 21 does, and on April 4th, the third and final part of BC Next's essay on Next was released. BC Next has left the Next community and is no longer responsible for its future direction. In his message, BC Next says that Next will fail unless the community rallies behind it and keeps it running. He argues that mathematical algorithms are not sufficient to immortalize Bitcoin or Next because math cannot account for the imperfection of humanity. BC Next says that Bitcoin and Next are stepping stones and that his main project will be released in the future under his own name. You can read BC Next's full message, all three parts, on the Next Wiki at wiki.nextcrypto.org. For more general information on Next, head to nextcrypto.org or mynext.org. And stay tuned for more news on Next in the next Let's Talk Bitcoin broadcast.
So it sounds to me like what you're saying is that the protocols and the projects that we've kind of seen to this point are one of two categories. You can think of them either like new species, derivative spin-off sort of things that are derived from Bitcoin, but that don't really add much to it. And then on the other side, you've got structures that build on top of Bitcoin and try to add more to it. Just sounds to me like you're saying that blockchain technology, at least in its current incarnation, doesn't really scale that well vertically, and so we need to be very concerned for efficiency reasons, and therefore it makes sense rather than building everything into one Bitcoin, instead we make 100 Bitcoins or 1,000 Bitcoins that all are able to interoperate with each other, and so therefore we have a lot of redundancy in the system if one or multiples of them fail, right?
Mainly the idea is that, at the moment, it's partly a technological innovation and the progress of it. So lots of people seem to be interested in the potential for issued assets and smart contracts. They can see that could be a very interesting thing for the future, and that you can do sort of programmable trust, trustless escrow and other kinds of innovations built on top of it. But the question is, okay, how do you do that? Like if you'd asked most people early last year how you do that, Colorcoin was the answer. Then we had the alternate shares, like BitShares, Ethereum, Mastercoin, coming in and adding other stories between Colorcoin. So they were like separate networks or networks based on watermarking on top of the Bitcoin network. And I think the pegging technology is the next step of technological improvement, which allows you to get the effects they were after and reach the objectives that people are interested in, but in an interoperable way. So I think it is building on top of Bitcoin and it's not starting a new thing. It's like directly interoperable with Bitcoin, but in a way which doesn't result in basically spamming or, like watermarking Bitcoin transactions so that every single share transaction or bid or ask ends up being a message on top of Bitcoin, saturating Bitcoin. So it turns out you don't need to do that, basically. You can make a sidechain which is pegged to Bitcoin, so you're still dealing with real Bitcoins with no counterparty risk. There's no escrow agent holding your Bitcoin. Your Bitcoin is just able to move between networks which are tied in the sense of being merge mined. And then people can do their innovation in an interoperable way. So I think the loose analogy would be like in the early days of TCP/IP, if every time somebody wanted to make, media streaming, web pages, online shopping, each time they'd made a fork of the TCP protocol, changed a few parameters so that it was an incompatible network, and said, great, we've done online shopping. And then you'd find out that none of these things talk to each other, and you'd have to pull them out and put them back in again to even achieve anything. So you get network effect by having interoperable systems. So if we can have different people innovating on different aspects, micropayments, online shares, high-frequency trading, to do all these things in different networks, but that are open networks, preserve the freedom to innovate, and fully interoperable at the Bitcoin level across two-way pegs. I think we kind of get the best of both worlds. We get the open freedom to innovate, and we avoid the silo effect where each network is separate, and we avoid these kinds of possibly self-defeating sort of selfish new share issuance situations that some things end up being built on.
Part of what's critical about this is for the community as a whole, we don't want to see another Mt. Gox happen. And it wasn't only Mt. Gox. Exchanges have had an incredibly high failure rate, either through theft, incompetence, or internal malfeasance. And we need to see the entire infrastructure. Although there are new players in the industry who are standing up and saying, we're doing security audits, or we're investing more in security, and we're doing things different, they're still operating off blockchain on a trust me model, usually holding private keys or security in a trusted entity. And we need to extend the trustless infrastructure of the blockchain to more parts of the ecosystem, but you can only do that if the blockchain can actually scale to have more of every interaction dependent on the blockchain. Because some of the exchanges, for instance, internally were doing more than 7 transactions per second. And so there was, aside from how they designed themselves, there was a very practical limit to what they could do on the blockchain. And so it became just easier for everyone to do things off blockchain. And that leads to an IOU situation where you don't own your Bitcoins. You just agreed that someone promises not to run away with them. And that's not good for this ecosystem.
I mean, it's actually not really using the features of Bitcoin. I mean, what Bitcoin and smart contracts offer is the ability to build, infrastructure, services, exchanges, payment processors, to build all these ecosystem components in a decentralized way, in such a way that you can get service without having to trust the service operator. That's, as I see it, that is the interesting new property of smart contracts in the Bitcoin model. And almost all of the system players are not using it. So partly that's because it's more complicated and they were just trying to do, some simple Web 2.0 stuff. But it's also, as Austin said, somewhat an artifact of the transaction rate limit. So if we can get sidechains running that can support higher transaction rates and avoid the centralization risk by the ability to remove coins back to the other network, you should be able to build, for example, a Bitcoin exchange which doesn't hold your coins. So it's possible for the users to atomically swap coins using an atomic swap property, which is a known property but not very widely used. And then the exchange can just be matching orders. And so that can basically remove the need for audit. I mean, audit is after the fact reactive. If we'd had audits every 6 months on Mt. Gox, that doesn't necessarily mean that the situation would have been avoided, because the situation probably arose within a 6-month interval. So the point of Bitcoin is is that you have real-time audit, basically, that if somebody tries to do something outside of the smart contract, like to have an exchange that tries to take the money, or you agree to an order for somebody to try not fulfill their part of it, it's a priori prevented and real-time audited, so that at the end of the transaction, you know what's happened, rather than finding out 6 months later that an exchange lost all its money. So by architecting these things in a way where you don't have to trust them, you can basically trade with air gaps. So like offline wallets, like hardware wallets, Armory wallets, the Armory offline wallet on the user side, and also the server, if it's hacked, it doesn't really have any assets at play. So as long as you spot check the prices that you're agreeing to, there's not really that much bad that will happen in this model if an exchange is compromised.
So the exchange never has your keys. They just handle the order matching now in this paradigm. Is that right?
That's right.
That's right. So they can compete on marketing, on building liquidity and volume. They can compete on customer service, regulatory compliance, based off the new IRS ruling, making it easier for you to file your taxes. There's a whole bunch of things they can innovate on, but the basic security model isn't trust us with your assets. It's trust us to deliver a great marketplace where you can find the best liquidity and the fastest and best customer service, but you never need trust us with your assets.
So I think I mentioned this to you. I have like 10 projects that I'm consulting on that are all in the user-created asset space, and they're on a variety of the projects that were out there. I don't pick favorites. I don't pick teams on this stuff. I'm looking for the best solutions. So, is this a solution that is available or will be available in the near future? And if I have, these 10 projects, some of which are like Kickstarter type tokens, and others are more like IPOs or equity sort of things. And some are just kind of like a charity project. So would each one of these get its own chain? Would I launch a chain for all of my projects? Would I use a specific chain that you're thinking is going to be out there? How would this work?
Around this, we had focused for the last 2 months on the core science, because we gathered a number of the Bitcoin core developers from around the world, many of whom who hadn't even met each other. And we set up a house in California where they all came and collaborated. Some of them lived in the house, and a number of them came into we were kind of calling it the Bitcoin mansion. It wasn't a mansion, but it was a big house. A lot of them came into the Bitcoin mansion and said, this is not possible. We don't believe in this approach. The ability to do a two-way peg and retain all the properties and build a security firewall around Bitcoin is impossible. We've now proven it is. We've gotten sign-off and support from a lot of the Bitcoin core developers, but even that change is going to require some time because there's a community at large that needs to understand it. There's a proving period that needs to be there. And, these guys are incredibly overlooked, unfortunately, I think, by the ecosystem that depends on them. And they're volunteers, by and large, who are controlling some of the most important code on the planet, I think. Next to like space shuttle, if we have a whole bunch of space shuttles and space stations blowing up, it can ruin space exploration. If they mess up, they can ruin math-based currencies or set them back incredibly far. And so they have to be very judicious and patient in adopting changes.
Right. Actually, and that point tends to lead to contention. And I saw it myself last year. So when I was talking to Andreas, I explained a whole bunch of ideas that I'd come across and some that I'd invented myself that would make interesting new features for Bitcoin. And once you get in that mindset of like, okay, this would be cool, it seems to work. After a while, they can't really afford to entertain your pet project, even if it's a very cool project, because they're protecting $10 billion worth of assets, and if they accidentally introduce a bug while adding your cool feature, that everybody will have a bad 5 years in the cryptocurrency space. So it means that it's actually the innovation on the core is actually slow. I mean, literally, the pace of innovation is slow because it's conservative and value preserving and focused on robustness, fixing minor bugs, that kind of very careful, gradual change. So the idea with a two-way peg, so the two-way peg itself requires a moderately high-risk change to Bitcoin itself. So that's a kind of bootstrap problem that they have to evaluate this change or set of changes and be very sure that it's safe. But once that's done, it allows people to do innovation on sidechains. And so they can, different people can explore different properties on different sidechains. So if Zero Cash wants to do something, they could go do it on a sidechain. If somebody gets, in 6 months starts to have a big argument about increasing the block size, well, they can go do that on a sidechain. And maybe the main Bitcoin network wants to even reduce the block size to increase decentralization. If somebody wants to do something, with changing the contracting language, explicit support for coloring, i.e. tagged issued assets, which are SPV compatible, they can do that on another sidechain. And people with different views about what contracting language should be can do it on different sidechains. So it basically frees up the space to allow open innovation more rapidly without creating risk for Bitcoin main, because basically the security firewall guarantees that if you elect to move coins into a sidechain, you are exposed to bugs on that sidechain that affect value. Obviously, people will be very careful on that. But the people with money in the main Bitcoin chain and other competing sidechains are unaffected by that bug. There's an absolute firewall. So the way that works is you can only move coins back that have been moved out. So, if somebody puts one Bitcoin into an experimental sidechain and something goes wrong and somebody takes it, well, they lost the Bitcoin. But the main Bitcoin network is unaffected and can't be affected, basically.
The value of a Bitcoin, regardless of what chain it currently resides on, is still one Bitcoin, right? The value does not float against other chains of Bitcoin.
Right. There's an actually implemented protocol where you can move the Bitcoin. You've got Bitcoin on one chain, you want it onto another chain. Now, for efficiency, when there's sufficient market demand floating around, you might swap with somebody who wants to move in the other direction. But you have the ability to actually move the Bitcoin you possess directly onto the other chain.
So this is a flexible money supply implementation then, yes?
It's still fully preserving the 21 million cap and the supply function. So actually, it's only the main Bitcoin network that is mining and creating new coins. The other sidechains are just repositories for coins. So you can move Bitcoins out of the main network into them and back out.
Is there a financial motivation for someone to merge mine one of these if there's no reward?
Good question, and we believe there will be. But some of those details we're not exactly disclosing. We're in discussion with a lot of the large miners and mining pools on making sure that they have good incentives and good reasons to merge mine this. There will be an economic model that supports participation and follows a lot of the same model of Bitcoin. It just won't be based off mining rewards. So obviously that leaves transaction fees. But there is a transaction model that is flexible, that's market-based, that would allow each of these sidechains to have their own innovations, but collectively, all of them together can increase the transaction fee revenue for people who are merge mining this.
I see.
And one of the other key points to remember is what's great about this idea that really I enjoyed looking at it from a large-scale complex systems design and merchant property is it will actually drive demand for Bitcoin and increase the utilization of Bitcoin, because now you have a whole bunch of other interesting assets that can be or contracts that can be written against Bitcoin. And so you can imagine once, we've had some discussions with some very, very large financial institutions who are looking at volumes of transactions and contracts and derivatives and future options contracts that are like orders of magnitude larger than the entire Bitcoin asset base. Huge. And so when you start to be able to embrace or extend the functionality to include part of their asset base encoded in blockchain technology, you can start to see where the demand for Bitcoin will far outpace the availability and will ultimately drive up the price of Bitcoin, I believe.
Right. So, remembering that the Bitcoin's price is there's a speculative part, which is looking at the future potential utilization, but largely Bitcoin's value is its utility value. So the fact that you can make transactions for flat fees and so on. So once somebody is able to bring to the market an open network for supporting smart contracts against other assets, that opens up a wider set of transaction types. So you would expect the transaction throughput to go up, the dollar value being transacted to go up. And as Bitcoin is the kind of neutral transactional currency of all of these sidechains, therefore the amount of Bitcoin denominated transactions goes up, which puts up the utility value of Bitcoin.
Bitcoin Expo 2014, presented by the Bitcoin Alliance of Canada, is just a week away. The conference will feature the key players behind Ethereum, CA Vertex, Litecoin, Open Transactions, Sean's Outpost, CoinTalk, Mastercoin, Dark Wallet, CryptoKit, Blockchain.info, QuickBT, Bitcoin Magazine, and many others, with special guest Andreas Antonopoulos as the Master of Ceremonies. Bitcoin Expo 2014, Toronto, Canada, April 11th to 13th. For tickets, visit bitcoinexpo.ca.
The BitGive Foundation is a non-profit charitable giving organization leveraging the power of the Bitcoin community to improve public health and the environment worldwide. Help us demonstrate the significant impact of Bitcoin in addressing these critical issues on a global scale. Support international giving in Bitcoin. Please visit our website at www.bitgivefoundation.org. That's www.bitgivefoundation.org.
Right. I definitely see the argument for value here. One question I have about potential limits to innovation in a system like this, since you're still utilizing Bitcoin's mining, that means that the block time should still remain at about 10 minutes. And for some of these like decentralized trading applications like we've talked about in the past, that actually winds up being kind of a long time because it's the amount of time it takes between the time that you say, I'd like to do this action, and the time that the blockchain actually has included it and it actually has happened. So is there the ability to try faster block times, or is 10 minutes the low bound limitation?
You can potentially do different block intervals on a sidechain counterintuitively, because when you're merge mining with, let's say, Namecoin as an example, because Namecoin has a percentage of the hash rate, that means that some Namecoin winning blocks are not Bitcoin blocks, and vice versa. So you can have a different target. You can have smaller, faster blocks if you want. So it is possible within the framework to support that.
In addition to that, two of the members of our who are working on some of these ideas with us have had some really great innovations around how to scale to hundreds of thousands of transactions per second while retaining all of the properties of a blockchain security model. And those innovations will allow for high frequency trading, very, very high speed liquid markets and exchanges that are using blockchain security model and blockchain trustless infrastructures, but meet the business requirements that are necessary to be able to do high volume. And that is definitely part of our project scope, is to make those platforms available for people who do have, someone who may come in and say, hey, I want to replace, I want to compete with Visa, but I can see myself hitting 20, 30, 40, 50,000 transactions per second. Where am I going to process those and be able to get instantaneous transaction verification without having to wait for the limits that are in the blockchain? So we believe that that's very possible while retaining the trustless security model of the blockchain.
Two questions left, basically, from my end. So is this a project that we're gonna see results from in 2014, 2015, 2016? I know that the Bitcoin development team is rightly conservative, and so it seems like it might take a while to see this. And then the other thing is, this sounds really exciting and this sounds great. What else should I be asking about that I haven't known to ask?
Well, I'll tackle the first one. So we're right now combing our hair and putting on our hats and our fancy ties, although we don't wear ties. But we're getting ready to announce and kind of give some details to the project so that people who are interested can track the project and reveal it, including announcing the name and who's on the team. So that will be happening in the next 60 to 90 days. So a very short term. And we are going to be releasing, one of the principles that we adopted from kind of the cypherpunk principles is, and it's one of the founding principles of the project, is something called We Speak in Code. So we really want our products and our software releases to speak. And so we'll be releasing software very quickly that will help, that is necessary software for bootstrapping this type of ecosystem. And so there's a couple different parts of the existing blockchain and Bitcoin ecosystem that have huge gaping problems that we can deliver immediate value without needing to wait, the 12, 18, or 24 months that it might take to get some of these changes adopted in Bitcoin Core. And, some people are aware of these problems, but we feel that we can deliver immediate value based off that. Get out there, start releasing very useful open source, free software, some software stacks that other people can adopt in the ecosystem to secure their users' accounts and secure parts of the Bitcoin ecosystem that are operating on a trust me model. We think we can deliver a lot of value by helping them move to more of a trustless infrastructure. So we're going to focus on doing that. At the same time, we're going to be investing very heavily. We're putting together a really good team of cryptographers, programmers, working to support some of the volunteers in the Bitcoin Core community to provide them resources and allow them to really, accelerate some of the things that they know they need to be done. But call it a criticism, call it, a comment for the community. You need to remember that most of these guys are volunteers. They have day jobs. They carry a huge amount of weight on their shoulders, and they do it because they love the community and they love the technology. They have not, I think, in many parts, received a lot of support. I mean, the community has come together and it pays Gavin's salary and others, but a lot of these guys are still volunteers. I think, supporting them and providing them with more tools, more infrastructure, more testers, more documentation resources, travel vouchers so that they can actually get together and meet face-to-face once in a while. These are all things that we're going to be doing, and we hope the community will participate in that as we announce details of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I noticed at the Coin Summit conference that some of the ecosystem players on the payment processor side were asked a question from the audience about supporting core development. I mean, everybody in the Bitcoin ecosystem is relying on the Bitcoin Core. Bitcoin D, right? And they were asked, in what way they were supporting that, and if they would be able to, for example, if they have core developer or senior developers on their staff who are very familiar with the Bitcoin protocol, have them contribute time to Bitcoin Core testing, maintenance, development, and the answers were mostly aspirational. There were some actual comments to suggest that their staff were already working on that, so I think that's good. But I think that really the business community should step up and, in the Linux-like model, have people on staff, as they can afford, who are working on the Bitcoin Core, because their entire business model depends on the reliability and availability of the Bitcoin network.
I'm seeing a lot of people these days talking about Bitcoin 2.0, and I'm very curious here, guys. Is what you're working on the real Bitcoin 2.0?
We are a blockchain technology company. Although I personally care for the success of Bitcoin, it's important to distinguish between Bitcoin, the asset, and the blockchain as a programmable distributed trust infrastructure. And we're interested in blockchain 2.0. And blockchain 2.0, using Bitcoin as a neutral transactional currency, we believe is offers great promise. But I want to build a blockchain that could support a nation state putting its national currency and phasing out paper dollars. And there's a lot of reasons to do that. Counterfeiting, utility value, conducting commerce, in separate geographic distances, auditability, trust. There's a whole bunch of potential to reinvent our financial services infrastructure to better serve mankind or humankind. And we've only begun that journey. And I'm interested in a platform that is distributed, neutral, has all the principles and properties of Bitcoin, has embedded and imbued in it the principle of can't be evil, and allows the world to migrate into math-based assets and math-based currencies. That's going to take time, but we're interested in building that blockchain 2.0, but doing it in a way that is an extension of the existing blockchain, not running off and building our own alt ecosystem and, pre-mining it and watching Adam and I get rich off having the first coins. That's not our intent.
Right. So no altcoin race attached to this. It's purely neutral, using the Bitcoin as the transactional currency. So, and Austin was mentioning there about sort of systemic risk issues. You can see that with Bitcoin, if more of business starts to move their accounting and business-to-business payments into Bitcoin, and cryptocurrency, issued assets and cryptocurrency denominated in national currencies, you get the benefits of this kind of zero trust, immediate auditability feature. So, if you are receiving an insurance contract for your car from an insurance policy and they're about to exceed their reinsurance limit, that would mean your insurance policy would be immediately failing the audit and be considered invalid by your client. So you can start to remove systemic risk from the system and avoid kind of Enron-like situations. And even in the long term, so there would have to be a number of iterations of smart contracting before we get to those kinds of things. But even in the long term, you could imagine a national currency issued where they would have a smart contract, like an issuance contract, that specifies their monetary policy, that they're going to have no more than 2% quantitative easing, or maybe subject to some internally measurable market metrics. And that applies to them. So even though they have the key to issue more coins in some, redundant hardware air-gapped key manager, they would be physically unable to bypass their monetary policy rules, because their monetary policy rule is bound into the genesis of the coin. And so all recipients of the coin would immediately reject them if they try to exceed their own monetary policy. So I think if we can get to a system like that, we can have kind of real-time auditing and agree to societal rules and enforce them a priori, rather than finding out 6 months or 12 months later that, somebody has hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars of undisclosed assets, and then you have an AIG or all these kind of sort of cascading failures in the system.
And I think one of the important things is at zero knowledge. I mean, it's kind of funny because a lot of the history of zero knowledge isn't as archived as today's media and internet companies. YouTube didn't exist when we built zero knowledge, but at the time we were very thumb our nose in the face of authority. We were fighting, the Edward Snowden type battles. The NSA and CIA tried to shut us down, and we were on 60 Minutes, advocating crypto for all and tear down the system. And I think part of my own maturing process is when we started to realize, that may not be the best way to interact with these guys. Is I'm coming for you. I'm going to burn down your system. And so the financial services industry, the people we've talked to, have real problems themselves. We talked to a very large buy-side financial institution who literally has hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars worth of assets under management. And they said, from a pure compliance point of view, we don't even understand our risk. We've got entire teams holding binders of contracts and systems, and we're trying to figure out how to even understand what we own and what the risk is and what the underlying asset is. So if you can help us, if we can digitize some of this, if we can have it be encoded in a way that we can actually make representations for compliance reasons and for our own risk management, we would welcome you in. And so I think there are some opportunities to show both governments, financial institutions, that this technology is not about wiping them out or destroying their business. This technology is about imbuing the entire ecosystem with verifiability, trust based off distribution and math, and some real good foundation levels that they can then reinvent their businesses. And yes, it will drive some competition in the industry and hopefully some more efficiencies. But just like news and media organizations are readapting to the internet and learning new ways to rebuild their businesses, we want to encourage these people to look for efficiencies. And those that do will be much more like the Netflix of the futures versus the Blockbusters of the future. And so we want to help them figure out how to rebuild their businesses as the Netflix, not the Blockbuster. And if they don't want to adapt, face extinction.
Just wanted to say another thing about this sort of public auditability. So a typical objection to public auditability on a commercial basis is that companies and individuals do not want, their business model to be public knowledge, their profit margin, their volume of trade, their market movements. If somebody is selling a large number of stock, they like to keep that to themselves and not have that readily available to the market. And so that tends to present a barrier to the public auditability, that they're saying, well, public auditability is nice, but we've got to preserve commercial confidentiality. So it turns out you can have your cake and eat it. So last time when I was talking to Andreas, I was explaining this concept of homomorphically encrypted values. So it turns out that you can have the blockchain validate that the inputs add up to the outputs without disclosing the values involved, because they're encrypted in such a way that addition still works on them. And that actually, at a lower level, includes a zero-knowledge range proof. So you can actually prove that an encrypted value A is less than an encrypted value B, or even that an encrypted value A is less than a multiple of an encrypted value B. And so you can actually use it to prove leverage ratios and things like that. So you can do a lot of things in a way that preserve commercial confidentiality and still have public auditability. So I think there's really a scope that we can preserve that, the traditional and necessary even financial privacy for individuals and commercial sensitivity for companies while having full public auditability.
The way that you describe that makes me think of pseudonymous numbers, right? Because they still represent real value, but not their necessarily true identity, right?
Yeah, it's kind of analogous. I mean, you're just saying that I can see that two parties engaged in a currency swap or whatever kind of instrument they're dealing in, their identities are not apparent to me at the blockchain level, but they will have business records saying who they bought it from if there's ever a need to investigate that. And
right, it can be unwound.
There are two networks involved in Bitcoin or blockchain-related transactions. There's the blockchain, the actual broadcast peer-to-peer network, and things that go on the peer-to-peer network are byte minimized because it's a scarce resource, and you don't censor that more than you need to send to ensure the correct interpretation of the transaction. The auxiliary information about an X509 certificate identifying the seller, a receipt, an invoice, all that kind of stuff goes at the payment protocol level, which is point-to-point communication between the buyer and the seller. And if one of them is a business, they'll be keeping business records. Or if you're an individual, you'll be keeping your receipts so you can prepare your accounts at the end of the year for taxation purposes. I think there is identity, but the identity is managed between the parties of the transaction, not broadcast to the peer-to-peer network. And so that, there's a problem with Bitcoin that it's so open that people do network flow analysis and figure out too many things. So if you keep the identity out of it, it's already bad enough without adding identity to it. Going back to the value hiding, basically we're saying that if you look at the Bitcoin right now, the Bitcoin network flow analysis, you can see that this address paid to this address and probably this was changed that went to this address. And it becomes, it preserves a different kind of privacy if you can hide the value. So one example people give about why you need financial privacy is some people are paid their salary in Bitcoin. And so maybe you can figure out who this guy is because, he bought a pizza in the shop or he paid you back a small amount that he owed you or something. So you see an address. I mean, they shouldn't be reusing addresses, but still there are links between them. So if he was paid his salary and the amount of the salary was encrypted, you wouldn't know how much he was paid. And if he paid you personally $10, you could see that the change that he received plus $10 is equal to his salary for the month. But you still don't know what his salary for the month is. You just know that he hasn't exceeded the value of the transaction.
Guys, this is a really, really fascinating project. If people want to learn more about it, it sounds like they're going to have to wait a little bit. But are you looking for help or applicants to help you build this thing out?
We will be launching a website with some information as well, some job postings that we're going to be doing, and we'll certainly reach out. For now, I think if people keep track of us on Twitter, I'm at Austin Hill, and Adam is at Adam3US. And so if people keep watch of our Twitter accounts, we will be at least announcing the name of the project and the website in the coming month. There'll be at least a placeholder website where we release some more details and list the jobs available.
Austin Hill, Dr. Adam Back, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Adam.
Thanks for listening to episode 99 of Let's Talk Bitcoin. Content for today's episode was provided by Adam Back, Austin Hill, and Adam B. Levine. Music for this episode was provided by Jared Rubens and General Fuzz. Any questions or comments? Email Adam at letstalkbitcoin.com. See you next time.